Good evening. I'm Tiffany Bennett, the Director of Alumni Affairs at the University. I'm so thankful to work in an environment where thoughts and ideas are put into action. I want to take a few moments to thank and recognize the people who made tonight happen. You may see and hear from some of these individuals later, but some have been purely behind the scenes. First, Cortez Bennett, who presented this idea from the junior board. We're so thankful that he did, because I think this is going to be a great event. Cortez, Terra Miller, and Carolyn Jones, who helped plan this event, with the encouragement and leadership from Cynthia Todd, UMNAA president, and Casey Kilpatrick, the junior board president. And of course, university administration. Thank you especially to President Stewart, Dr. Christy Lee, and Scott Dillard for their help and support. During alumni events and activities, we often talk about UM being family. Well, tonight, some of our family is hurting. We need to have an honest conversation with transparency and integrity. You may hear some things that are hard to hear, but please truly listen to your fellow Montevallo family members. Let's learn from each other and cultivate change. Now I would like to introduce you all to Ms. Cynthia Todd, President of the University of Montevallo National Alumni Association.
Thank you, Tiffany, and good evening, everyone. I am Cynthia Todd, President of the University of Montevallo National Alumni Association. On behalf of the National Alumni Association Board of Directors and the Junior Board of Directors, we do welcome you to Cultivate Change. I certainly appreciate your time and interest in this very important subject, especially at this particular time in history. At this time, I am very pleased to welcome University President Dr. Joan Stewart to bring a welcome on behalf of our university, followed by Dr. Sierra Turner, UM's Chief Diversity Officer. President Stewart.
Thank you so much, Cynthia. Good evening, everybody, and thank you for joining the UM family for this event tonight. And I think Tiffany's right, and Cynthia, you're right. This is it's a great occasion to get together and talk about a great issue of our day, but it's also a sad time. Some of you, I hope, were able to see a statement that we put out from the university condemning the killing of George Floyd and stressing our support of our Black UM family members who we know are hurting at this time. And I wanted to let you know that in that statement, if you didn't see it, we said that we would be taking some action. And it wasn't just a sympathetic or empathetic statement that we were sending out. We want to listen, and we want to do what Montevallo has been doing for 124 years, which is educate students really, really well. But part of that education needs to be a renewed commitment, a redoubling of our commitment to equity and justice, racial equity and justice, including where we live in Montevallo and on our campus. And so a few days ago, we held a Zoom with our campus diversity leadership. And several of our folks tonight on the call, and we're on that Zoom, and I hope that they'll fill in. But just some of the things that were our takeaways in terms of action steps over the coming months were that we agreed that we need to get better at the things we do, and in terms of investing in our Black students, faculty, and staff. One of the things I know that's on your hearts and minds is the naming and renaming of buildings and monuments on our campus. And that's not just our campus, but lots of state university campuses in Alabama and even across the country. I mean, there's an embedded, very unfortunate and sad and tragic history of slavery, even up in the Ivy League schools. We're all dealing with it, but I wanted to let you know that I discussed this with our trustee leadership, and at their direction, I have put together an exploratory working group of a wide cross section of Montevallo family members, and I'll go over those with you so you'll know who it is. But I want to let you know that our special guest and National Alumni Association Board President Cynthia Todd is on that committee, and it will be 9 or 10 people. Greg Samuels, who joins us tonight, is our incoming Chief Diversity Officer, and we'll be working with our current Chief Diversity Officer, Sierra Turner, to make sure that we're doing all the right things. And Greg is also part of our African American Studies faculty and our Peace and Justice Studies faculty. So proud to have Cynthia and Greg on that committee. Leroy Nix, a trustee and rising star with the Alabama Power Company, many of you know, will serve on the committee. Tim Lupinacci, who's also a trustee, and Brian Hamilton, our trustee, will chair the committee. So it is very much trustee-led, but we'll also have other folks. Carrie Heatherly, our professor of history and university archivist, will serve. Emily Gill, our incoming faculty senate president, will serve on the committee, as well as 2 or 3 others. And so I want you to know that we're going to take it very seriously. And our goal will be not just to talk about things, but for the committee to make recommendations to the Board of Trustees concerning the naming of buildings at Montevallo in the August 7th trustee meeting. So we're going to work really hard to get that conversation started. We talked a lot about faculty hires and mostly investing in scholarships in our new MAID program that many of you have heard about, Minorities Achieving Dreams of Excellence. And we're going to invest money. We're not just going to talk about it. Faculty hires are important. We're going to insist on cultural training for faculty and staff. And we are going to make a commitment to diversity and have a statement of diversity front and center and conspicuous in the university's new strategic plan. That's new, and I'm very proud of that. There will be a very clear statement about the university's commitment to equity and racial equity and justice in the strategic plan, which holds us as an institution accountable. And so there'll be other action steps that we'll be taking. I'm happy to talk to any of you directly on the phone anytime. And so thank you so much for being an important part of this very crucial, sad, but promising time in our nation's history. So just thank you. And if there's ever anything I can do in your journey to improve the lives of our Black family members, please let me know. So thank you very much, Cynthia. Hey, Dr. Turner.
Hi, good evening, everyone. Dr. Stewart said a lot of what I was going to say, but I did.
Sorry about that.
No problem. But I did want to take just a few minutes to expand a little bit on some of the initiatives that he mentioned. We have, first of all, I would like for you all to know that this is not a conversation that just started on campus with us. This is something that we have been working on creating, making sure that Montevallo is a diverse environment, making sure that it is a safe environment for our students, for all students, not just, minority students, but for all students. And in those conversations, a few of the things that we have done here recently is, as Dr. Stewart mentioned, we have our MAID program, which stands for Minorities Achieving Dreams of Excellence. Fall 2019 was our first cohort of students, and we had just a great group of students. With the students that we had, all of them will be returning with the exception of 1 or 2 students. One graduated, but the program is a comprehensive program dedicated to helping minority students adjust to university life. And so we focus on helping them with their academic skills, also with social and professional development. And like I said, this is something that we we are committed to, something that the university has put a lot of time and effort into making sure that this happens so that those students, that they're able to succeed when they come on campus. Recently, in the last couple of years, we also have started the African American Studies minor. And most recently, we have added 3 new courses as part of that minor. One of those courses is our Black popular culture course. And then we also have a special topics course. I had the pleasure of teaching that course this past fall, and it focused on racial lynching, racial violence and lynching in the United States. And we also have an introductory course, and then a course that focuses on gender, race, and class. And so with that program, we're really excited to see how that program continues to engage all of our students that take those courses in the necessary conversations that we need to have in order to create the campus environment that we would like, but also to help them to contribute to our larger society. And then we also have our Peace and Justice Studies minor, and they will be offering their first course. I'm really excited about that this upcoming fall. And then there will also be some new online courses as part of that program that will be offered as well. So like I said, this is something that we have been working on. And as Dr. Stewart said, we have taken started moving in the right direction as far as professional development for our faculty that will focus on, helping to create culturally responsive classrooms. And we also are looking at ways that we can get our students involved and help to empower them. So thank you all for being here, and I look forward to answering any questions that you all may have.
Thank you, Dr. Turner. I'm Cortez Bennett. I am a special events chair for Junior Board. I want to thank all of our panelists for being here. Just want to start with a brief exercise. If you could just take a deep breath and just hold your breath until I start to speak again. Thank you. Go ahead and breathe. Now multiply the time that just passed by 8. That's how long an officer had his knee on George Floyd's neck. Unfortunately, the death of George Floyd is not the only reason we are here today. Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, and countless other people of color dying at the hands of an unjust system dating back to the inception of our country is one of the reasons why we are here today. While Mr. Floyd's death is not the only reason, it is the catalyst for why we are here. It is the catalyst for what we are seeing all over our country. Tonight, we hope that you will leave with some actionable items that you can use to work to cultivate change in your community. And to ensure that happens, we'll be sending out a list of resources to the email that you use to register to this panel discussion. And with that, I would like to introduce our moderator for the evening, Dr. Terra Miller.
Thank you so much, Cortez, and welcome to our panelists, our family and extended family. We're going to dive right into tonight's conversation and begin the discussion with Greg Jones. Greg is a 1985 graduate of the University of Montevallo and a retired FBI special agent. Greg, the nation is coming to terms that racial bias is real, and it exists outside of the job and inside the job, including jobs that rely on quick judgment, like medical care and law enforcement. What can be done to assess, confront, and remedy racial bias in places of work? What do those conversations and trainings look like with colleagues and supervisors from your experience?
Thank you, Dr. Miller, for allowing me to speak. Good evening, family and everyone. Just glad to be here today. Dr. Miller, one of the things that I think serve as a remedy is leadership. It starts with leadership. Leadership has to create an environment of fairness and respect. When I was a supervisor, I retired as a supervisory special agent 2016. And each employee that person that worked for me, I would call them in one-on-one, talk to them, get to know their family, get to know their kids, husband, talk to them about their hobbies, etc. It wasn't an easy job. I had, a few people that felt like they had to check me on the spot. One particular lady that I met for the first time, she put me on the spot. She said, Greg, just to let you know, I had a supervisor I didn't like years ago, and I filed an EEO complaint. Once she mentioned that and I talked to her, I found out she had 20 years in the FBI, and she had become a little jaded because of how certain people had treated her. She didn't feel like she always received fair treatment. So I made sure that I would treat her, not only treat her fair, but everybody else on my team fairly. I had about 4 high-level programs, and I would actually take people out to lunch, we would go to the movies together. We would just foster a culture that where people could trust and get to know one another. Training needs to take place also prior to retiring. I know implicit bias training was taking place, and some other things, some other videos that people had to see how people should be treated. But the bottom line is just fostering an atmosphere where people are just treated fairly and just talking to people, having an open door to where if somebody needs to come in and talk to you, they can come and talk to you. And that's what I loved about, and still love about Montevallo. I got to Montevallo in the fall of '83, and I owe a debt of gratitude to the university. I was on the first Kappa Alpha Psi fraternity. I was one of the founders of the Kappa Alpha Psi fraternity, and it was the second Black fraternity at Montevallo. And we were welcomed with open arms on campus. So I certainly like to thank Dr. Stewart and all of the people that are participating in the forum tonight. And I hopefully I answered your question. If I didn't, give me another question that leads into it that would help out a little better.
Yeah, we definitely have additional questions that we'll get to, but thank you so much for your insight and providing that glimpse into what training and leadership looks like in your prior experience with the agency. Thank you so much, Greg. Next, we have Kimberly Williams Pettway. Kimberly is a 1994 graduate of the University of Montevallo and currently a social work instructor and civic engagement leader. Kim, talking about racism like we're having to do today, reliving as a Black person your experience with racism can be draining and taxing, all in the name of creating dialogue in this nation. How can we talk openly about racism and engage in these conversations while preserving our mental wellness? How do we self-care and change the world at the same time? Kim, if you could just unmute. I'm so sorry.
I'm sorry, I thought you guys were doing that. Thank you. Again, thank you so much for having me here. I absolutely love Montevallo, some of the best days of my life. So I'm always eager to get back when I can. You know, it's interesting that you asked me that question because this is the third panel this week that I have been speaking on. as it relates to the issue of George Floyd and race relations in America. But I also, when I teach at University of South Alabama, and we did not have a social work course on power or privilege or anything like that. And I was often on a panel yearly with the College of Medicine, and they too had no diversity courses. So I created a course, Power, Privilege, and Oppression in a Pluralistic World. And I did not take into account what it would do to me to teach the course. And so initially when I started teaching, it was twice a week, and I would have breaks in between. And then there came the semester that I had to teach it every day. I found myself getting angry. You know, it literally drained all of my energy. By the time I made it home, I was done. And what I had to do, Terra, for one, is to just step back. Following each course, each engagement, I had to step back and reflect, meditate, you know, go inward. Because when I'm teaching the course or when we're having these conversations, we're kind of stepping outside into this chaotic world where we know race means so much, right? And so I just had to retreat to myself and really, really stay honest with myself about how I was feeling. You know, for me, it was even more dynamic teaching at a PWI. And it helps because I'm teaching social work students who tend to be a little bit more open. Yet we still had those moments where I had, you know, students who were not quite feeling what I had to say. And I was challenged often. And so I can absolutely say that I've lived it. I've been overwhelmed by it. And there was a time that I thought maybe I needed to take a semester off from teaching the course. I did not, but I certainly considered it. And so other than retreating, you know, meditating and being really honest with myself about how I was feeling, when I had moments where I was just ticked off, I couldn't believe it, I would talk to my class. I would take it to class and we would dissect it. And what I realized is that my students were struggling too. They were struggling with dealing with the issue. They took it home too. They were mad because nobody else really wanted to talk about it, you know, these new discoveries. So I really think taking that time to be honest about how you're feeling, retreating inward to make sure that you are keeping that internal environment healthy so that we don't develop biases, you know, and staying honest. When I'm angry about it, you know? When I'm forgiving about it. I just had to really stay honest with those who I was engaging. And when I needed a break, I needed a break. And I had to take it. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Kim, for that insight. And hopefully, I didn't mention this earlier, we all are taking notes, and there's always something new to learn, and hopefully this conversation will do that for you. Next, we have Andrea Eckelman. Andrea is a professor of political science at the University of Montevallo. Andrea, this isn't the first time that we have encountered this movement, but it also isn't the only issue currently at play. We often hear all lives matter when the Black Lives Matter movement is present and in the spotlight. And we also hear that women are also fighting for equal rights too. Is there room to fight multiple fights at once? Are they mutually exclusive? And what does the road look like for racial equity going forward?
Thank you so much. I appreciate you guys having me to be a part of this discussion tonight. So I would say in terms of, is there room to fight for these things together? I would say absolutely. And my, I guess the good news that I have to bring to the table tonight is I've been participating on the NAACP's weekly town halls and listening in on what the NAACP leadership has to say, their guest speakers. And overwhelmingly, their panelists, their leadership has really been energized by the fact that this time feels a little different, right? That the marches that we're seeing, the protests that we're seeing, it's people of all color, right, of all ages. And so whereas some of the other marches, like if you think back to the big events, right, that led to the Voting Rights Act of 1964, the Civil Rights Act of 1965, it felt like that was primarily African Americans fighting for that, right? But that this feels different, and that we're all sort of in this together. And I think a lot of that stems from sort of what you're talking about, right? That women are still trying to get equal pay and reproductive access, and you know, all of these issues, right? But there's a really big intersection here, right? And so I think that the sort of the larger thing here is we're fighting for a new world, right? So what do we want that new world to look like? And in most not most, in every instance here, right, white people and white women are going to have to acknowledge their privilege, acknowledge the amount of power that we have in our homes and with our wallets and everything, right? And really try to figure out how can we channel that privilege to help our brothers and sisters of color. And I think this is something that Dr. Stewart was talking about at the beginning, right, around sort of faculty and what we can do, right, and sort of bringing our privilege to bear on this situation. So I think that a lot of this sort of centers around, if we want this world to be a better place, we all need to be equal. So we have to acknowledge that intersection, and we have to acknowledge the fact that we're all in this together. And in terms of sort of the road ahead, I think we're already headed down it. But I keep hearing in all these calls and webinars I'm doing, I'm hearing over and over about there are lots of lanes on the highway to change. The most important thing is that you keep your foot on the gas, right? And I love that. And I love sort of thinking about collective action and the fact that collective action involves all of us, right? And so particularly for white people, for me specifically as a white woman, that we need to listen. I think that's the really, really key piece here. We need to listen, and we need to follow the lead of leaders that have already started to pave the way and sort of take our cues there. And I just think the good news is it's happening right now. We just have to keep our foot on the gas.
Thank you so much, Andrea. And our final panelist tonight is Cedric Norman. Cedric is a 2009 graduate of the University of Montevallo and current Fairfield City Councilor and Woke Vote leader. Cedric, one of those paths forward is the need to vote. This is a national conversation, but there is a local and state component. In order to change laws, implement new policies, make charges against brutality, those are all things that have to be done at the local level. Can you talk to us about what that looks like at the local level? And then speaking specifically about voting, voter apathy is real, having promises of changes that are never implemented. How do we follow through and address issues like voter apathy?
Well, thank you, Dr. Miller, and thank you to you all at University of Montevallo for inviting me back in. Anytime I can speak on behalf of my home institution, it's always a joy. So let's speak to voting first, the voting component of this all. So when you look at voting, one of the organizations that I do work with, Woke Vote, the creation of Woke Vote was in 2017 from a need to erase or eliminate or reduce voter apathy, particularly when it comes to millennial African-American students or African-Americans in general. So purpose of Woke Vote is to engage the millennial community and even the church-going community to get them motivated to go out and vote and the importance of vote. So it's non-biased, it's It's nonpartisan. We don't support a particular party or candidate. We believe that when individuals in the African American community are empowered and educated, that they will make the decision for their best interest, whether that relies with a Republican or lies with a Democrat. That's not our choice in what vote for them to make. It's just to educate them of the issues of the candidates and give them the empowerment to be able to go out and vote. And that means holding voter registration drives or communicating about absentee ballot deadlines and voter registration deadlines and needing to change an address if you are at a college campus and things of that nature. So voting apathy, like you said, Dr. Miller, is a very real thing, and it's something very critical and crucial. Particularly many of us in the African American community don't believe voting matters or voting plays a difference, but I always counter that with, if it didn't matter and if it doesn't make a difference, then there wouldn't be so many people trying to suppress your vote, and there wouldn't have been so many people who died for the right to vote. You look at just this past Tuesday over in Georgia, I know individuals that were in line from 9:30 a.m. to 6 o'clock p.m. basically pulling a shift, an 8-hour shift in a line just to vote, and that shouldn't happen. So when you go to white communities in Georgia, they didn't have those issues. These issues were particularly in the Black community. Why is this happening in the Black community? It is a form of voter suppression to deter people from voting, not only just in a runoff election, but this is setting the stage for what will happen, I believe, in coming months in the November general election. It won't just be Georgia, it will happen in other highly contested battleground states. So the reason to vote, it is, we are not in a situation where we cannot afford to vote. We need to get credible, empathetic leaders into office, and the only way you can do that is to vote. Now, where that comes in on the responsibility of holding people accountable, you can't just hold them accountable with your vote and threaten, oh, if you don't do what I'm saying, I'm not going to vote for you in 4 years. Well, I can do whatever I want from 3 to 4 years, from 3 to 3.5 years, and that other half year, I'll work hard to get your vote, to get your vote again. So we have to hold people accountable. Even when it comes to presidential elections, we hold people accountable by the Senate, and it's a Senate and House of Representatives will be elected in 2022. So now is the time to create agenda items, to create demands and list of demands. So when that conversation arises in 2021, 2022, then we are able to have that conversation, because presidents, although they do have a lot of power and they are the leader, ultimately it's the same thing with the mayor, same thing with the governor. They rely on the legislative body, whether that be a city council, House of Representatives, Senate, on the state or federal level. So that's how we hold people accountable, by making sure that we put people in office who can vote for the legislation and vote for the agenda items of our particular candidate to make sure they go through. We can vote for Joe Biden, but if you don't get people in office and in the House of Representatives and Senate seats that reflect his agenda or support his agenda, then he can be up there. But if he has a House and a Senate that is working against him, then his agenda is all for naught. So we have to hold people accountable and not just say, well, I'm gonna vote for you, and then in 4 years say you didn't do what you were supposed to do. No, remind them of that monthly, remind them of that daily. Attend city council meetings, attend town hall meetings with your House of Representatives or your Senate member. Write them letters, call down, organize, go down to Montgomery or go up to DC or send advocates up to DC to be able to have those conversations to get that legislation in place. There's only so much we can do at a legislative branch to kind of bring about change. You can't legislate hate out. We can enforce policy better. We can increase policies. One of the policies that's going on at the federal level now is called the Breonna Taylor Law, where mandating that officers have to knock before they go in. So this is at the federal level, but this needs to be pushed down at the state level as well to be enforced in different state governments. And so so it's really about an education, finding out what laws are on the books and not on the books. You may have some laws that are on the books that aren't being enforced, and then you may have some laws that are on the books that need to really be off. So the Alabama Constitution is one of those things that it's the longest constitution in the United States, and a lot of people have been causing it to be called for it to be rewritten because of the racist language and the oppressive language that are all throughout there. So to be the main things that citizens can do is to be educated and hold your elected officials accountable, not just during election time, but when they're at city council meetings, when they're in their face, when you're in face, when they are proposing legislation that you agree or don't agree with. Now is the time to be involved.
Thank you, Cedric. Now we will move to the question and answer portion of tonight's discussion. Family, you have the option to use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen to submit your questions. We will get through as many as possible, but just know that if we do not get to your question, we will follow up and ensure that you have the information that you need following tonight's discussion. We're going to take a few of these questions that we have received so far, and we'll begin with this one. We are adults speaking amongst ourselves, but there is a younger generation, children. How do we have this conversation with children, and what exactly is it that needs to be said? I don't know if we can perhaps include both Andrea and Kim on that discussion. We'll start with Kim. Yes. Okay, great. Yes.
You know, I think that with our young people, very early on, we have to speak truth. You know, I have been saying just lately that this is truth-telling time. It is time for us to engage them and first of all, recognize the power that they have. You know how young people, we tend to talk at, not really to, and engage. And I think that it is important that we start with the creation. We have to really engage young people, recognizing the power and wisdom that they too bring to the table, but helping them to get what they often don't get in the textbooks or, you know, the history books or away from school. You know, when I was growing up, you went to school and that was it. There were no lessons at home, right? So the assumption is that you were getting what you needed to get at school. Well, when we look at culture and issues with race and equity, none of that you get in K through 12, right? So we have to figure out a way to, I mean, because the educational system, you know, is the second most important in socializing these children. And so how we can insert that into education early on, I think by third grade, quite honestly, by second grade, that we should start engaging them and just being really frank and honest about these social constructs in our society and what they should not mean, what they currently mean, but what they should not mean, so that they don't follow that path. I hope I answered the question right. Was that? Yeah.
Thank you. Yes, absolutely. So what I heard from that is typically we're afraid to have that conversation with early elementary, and I'm hearing you say that that is a conversation to have, and one that should not just be regulated at the home, that it is one that should be taking place in the schoolhouse through the official educational materials that they have. And so that's very helpful to hear. Andrea, did you have additional insight on that regarding educating children, talking to children about what's currently happening right now and how to be change agents?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this is going to be really good to partner with Kim, because I think I have a slightly different perspective on this coming from my public policy background. But I think it ties into what Cedric was saying earlier around voting and voting locally, because the people that make those decisions about your children's curriculum are people that we elect. Right? It is our school boards. It's the teachers, right? So the teachers that are hired in. And a lot of it centers around like the actual textbooks that are chosen to be adopted. I'm thinking about in my freshman level American National Government class, when we talk about civil rights and we talk about sort of the full story of Emmett Till, usually they've heard Emmett Till's name. They never really heard about what happened, right? And so to me, that is a gaping hole in like the full spectrum of K through 12 education, right? And so I think that there's a lot to be said for knowing who these people are that are making these decisions about curriculum, but also who are making decisions around what schools look like, what the districts are, where people are zoned, right? I was looking at some figures recently that a vast majority of children go to school with a majority of people of their same race, right? And so most of our children are in segregated schools. And I think that that is really problematic for trying to engage in these conversations as well. So, and that's the people that Cedric was talking about, that's who's making these decisions. So I think there's all of this ties in, right, in terms of our school systems, our elected officials, and the decisions that they're making for us every day.
Thank you both for that. I want to pose the next question to Greg, and it's two questions, and both of which I think you'll provide really great insight. The first is, if you've never had this conversation as a white person before regarding race, race equity and racism, how do you start the conversation? What are some conversation starters for that uncomfortable topic?
Dr. Miller, that's a great question. On Tuesday, Cynthia, my wife, and I actually met with two of my white female classmates from high school. And we've been talking for a while. And one of my classmates said, Greg, why don't you come over Tuesday, you and Cynthia, for breakfast? And let's have sit down and have a discussion about race. I need to understand or talk to you about some things that maybe I don't understand. So we talked about, we put everything on the table. We talked about George Floyd. We talked about institutional racism. We talked about how we could make a difference in this world. Some of the things that we could do. We might, we can, as we used to say in church, and some people would disagree with the statement, we can disagree without being disagreeable. And what I mean by that is we don't have to beat each other up because we don't see things the same way. Sometimes we misinterpret what somebody says, and but I've been blessed to get a Master of Arts in Human Behavior, so I study people, and you can tell when their heart is in the right place. But we've all got to sit down, listen to each other, share differences, talk about things that we're uncomfortable talking about regarding our race, and that's I think would be a great start.
Thank you for that. And then the second question I'd like to pose to you first, and then follow up with Cedric. If you're in a work environment, or maybe even an organization that doesn't believe it has a problem with diversity, race equity, how do you begin to motivate that organization or that company to start making changes?
Well, so I was the former recruiter for the Washington field office for the FBI. And one of my coworkers, before I became a recruiter, at the time we were submitting names to FBI headquarters. Every field office, such as the Washington field office, Seattle, Anchorage, Alaska, would have to submit X amount of names to headquarters for consideration to go on to Quantico to become an agent. And I noticed that my coworker, maybe she wasn't thinking about it, but we were submitting anywhere from 22 to 29 names, and they were all white. And I brought it to her attention that we needed to make sure more people of color were in the pool. And she actually said, Greg, you're not accusing me of being a racist, are you? I said, nope, not accusing you of being a racist. I'm just pointing out that this is a diverse world, and that in Washington, D.C. and other places, we've got to make sure that people of color are also represented at the table. So I think you can bring it to somebody's attention. I've gone to numerous conferences to represent the FBI at minority conferences. I was probably one of the first agents to ask if I could actually attend a national Delta meeting or AKA meeting, because we could possibly recruit more people of color at those locations. And but I didn't just go to Black conferences. I went to Hispanic, Asian, Native American. I made sure before I left that recruiting job that I had reached out to everybody, white people, black people, and I can say now and feel good about it that I've actually gotten people hired from every race. So I hope I've made a difference. I look forward to continuing to make a difference. I'm still in the recruiting process, even though I'm fully retired, but I'm still calling and asking people to join and trying to, tell people about the process, because it is with the FBI, it's like for special agents, it's like a 7-step process where there's a written exam, a panel interview, a polygraph, a meet and greet, a background investigation, a medical investigation, and a PT test. So I make sure that I tell people to stay in shape, eat right, do right, because the folks that are doing your background are going to go back and talk to people like they went back and talked to my high school coach and ask him about how I was even in high school, and that blew a lot of people's mind. I hope I answered your question.
You did, and you also reminded all of us that one of the important elements we're talking about diversity and inclusion in workplaces is to feel empowered to apply. So if there is anyone who's interested in exploring a career as an FBI agent, Greg Jones is your man. And Greg, will you be agreeable for people to reach out to you if they do have an interest in that?
Absolutely. 100%.
Or other areas of law enforcement. So please do let us know if that's something you'll be interested in, you and family.
No, and I wanted to be a profiler. I didn't know.
Right, right.
All right.
There are many. It's not too late. It's not too late. So please do let us know in the chat or Q&A if those are things that you're interested in, family. Cedric, I want to pose that question to you as well. An organization, your workplace, doesn't believe it has a problem. How do you broach that conversation, that topic with them?
Okay, I want to kind of double back to the question before that a little bit about having that conversation and dialogue. Just wanted to add 2 things quickly. I think first and foremost, you have to be open to have that conversation and not have a chip on your shoulder. I think a lot of times our counterparts are a little bit nervous about having that conversation because they don't know how we're going to react and what our response is going to be. So you have to take that chip off your shoulder and be willing and open to have that conversation. Second of all, you can't tell them just go educate yourselves. You need to do your history. Tell them what exactly they need to be researching and looking up. Tell them about the, look at the Confederacy and what was a part of those founding documents and what it really is about. So some history, and we have to often keep in mind that we talk about as African Americans, our history isn't taught in the history books. Well, their history is taught, or white history or American history is taught from a skewed standpoint, number one. And number two, they can't learn about our history because it's not in the books as well. So those 2 things. Now, to go back to the question on what you were saying about, how to get your workplace or your organization to recognize there is a diversity problem when they're saying there isn't one. You have to, kind of similar to what Greg was saying, you have to create the environment. The environment has to be there to be open or accepting of diverse cultures. And if it's not, then that's one of the things that you need to bring to the attention of the people in the organization. So something else I've learned, data and narratives are very important. You can tell people there's a problem, but there's a lot of times they will not move until numbers are presented, or you can find compelling narratives to go with your story or go with your cause that you're trying to champion. So the main 2 things that you want to do, data and narratives are very key. Secondly, you want to make sure you have a proposal for a program of sorts, and you want to make sure you have that ready to take advantage of opportunities that may be presented. A time like this, everyone is looking for different diversity outreach programs and different mentoring programs and whatnot. So if you have that proposal ready to go, now would be a perfect opportunity to either present it, or if you don't have a proposal together, now would be a perfect opportunity to go ahead and get that proposal together. A quick example, my sister works for an athletic program in the SEC. And as a result of this, she had a mentoring program, minority female mentoring program that she wanted to do. And it was kind of on hold or something that they planned to get to. But in light of everything that's going on in the world, she got the green light for that program to move forward because those athletes shared their experiences on that campus and what it was like to be a person of color on those campuses. So it got the attention of the powers that be in athletics to go ahead and greenlight that program because there was compelling narratives and data to show that that was a need. You definitely want to make sure you're beating the drum. So oftentimes you may not get hurt, but you want to continue to beat that drum and champion that cause as long as you can. And in doing that, you want to make sure you gain allies because allies can help you beat that drum, or they can have their own drum to beat, which makes it sound louder. What's going on, if you notice what's going on in the world, we're gaining more allies. You have more people who normally wouldn't speak or would make a tweet or a Facebook post and say, how is it such a travesty and an injustice? Now you're having more white allies come to our aid, come to the aid of the Black community to speak out against it and say no, and not making anyone feel comfortable or safe to be able to have those type of practices. So the more allies you gain, the louder your voice becomes and the less spaces for those type of things are to happen. And then, and that's take advantage of, I'll definitely take advantage of opportunities as they present. So that's all I have with that.
And Cedric, specific opportunities or resources in Birmingham for those who are getting ready to step out and address this with their organization or with their company. If you don't have any off the top of your head, would you be willing to work with us to ensure those resources could be compiled and sent out to attendees?
Yeah, I would definitely be more than happy to work with that. I do have a few organizations that come to mind. The Urban League of Birmingham is one of the oldest national Black organizations in the United States. You also have the NCAA chapter for Birmingham is another good organization. The organization I'm a part of, Woke Vote, we are national. It's Woke, but we are based in Alabama or started in Alabama, and that can be found at wokevote.us. I think it was a link that was posted in the chat comments as well. So that's another organization. And then you have the SCLC is still around. You have the Birmingham Civil Rights Institute that could probably use some help and could find some different volunteer opportunities. So those are some that come to mind off the top of my head, but I would definitely be willing to work with you guys on getting that list together of opportunities, not only for alums, but for students to know what options are available for them to be engaged with the community once they graduate.
Thank you, Cedric.
Can I add? I'm sorry.
Yes.
I also wanted to, just to kind of add to Cedric, I also wanted to mention the Equal Justice Initiative out of Montgomery. They have done absolutely wonderful work. And we actually just unveiled a lynching marker in the city of Montevallo the other day. It's a project that I was the co-leader for the Montevallo Coalition, along with Paul Mahaffey and Catherine King. And the EJI, they have been absolutely incredible. They've been on campus a couple of times. They provided us with a lot of resources. And so I would definitely encourage anyone, if you haven't already gone down to the National Peace and Justice Memorial in Montgomery, take the opportunity, go down there, spend a day, and just really absorb it all in. But they have been a tremendous resource for us.
And Dr. Turner, while we have you, if I could pose a quick question to you as well. What is the University of Montevallo doing to be intentional about recruiting Black Americans, not just as students, but in senior level positions as trustees and in places of leadership? And then if there are specific examples at perhaps some guidance for other universities and how they could also ensure an inclusive environment that raises the profile in this moment.
Okay. Yeah, so starting thinking about the work that we've been doing in recruiting students, we recently have hired an absolutely amazing, actually alum of the university. He graduated 2 years ago, Jason Perry, and his job is to focus on retention and recruitment for minority students. And Jason he's been busy. He has been all over Birmingham, Montgomery, surrounding areas, and he is going into the schools and he is fostering relationships with the counselors, with the administrators, and with the teachers. We had the opportunity during the fall semester, and we had one planned for the spring, but we had to cancel it. We actually took some of our current students to one of the local high schools so that the students could hear from a Black student's perspective what it's like being on the campus of a predominantly white institution. And the students at that high school, they appreciated the honesty and they appreciated the opportunity to not only learn the admission stuff that many of them, they want to know, but it's kind of boring to them. But we were able to, have, like our students talk about living on campus, talk about fraternities and sororities. And we had all the students that attended this particular one, they were, members of different Greek organizations. So they did, a little stroll and all of that. And the students absolutely appreciated that. Something else that we have been doing to intentionally recruit students is we've been bringing students on campus. This is something that started with a former colleague, and we have continued doing it. It's called Meet Me at Montevallo. And we bus students in from all over the state to come in. Primarily, we've been focusing on Birmingham, Montgomery, those areas, but we bring students in and they get to spend a day with us. We do a campus tour. They get the opportunity to do a student panel. They get to eat in the dining hall. They get to go see what campus looks like from a residence life perspective. And they also have the opportunity to meet with our admissions counselors, ask any questions that they have, and they get to attend a mock class or two while they're on campus. So those are some of the things that we're doing in terms of recruitment. As Dr. Stewart mentioned earlier, we are looking at different ways to recruit minority faculty members. And we have actually had a meeting about this the other day and have another one next week to try and figure out how we can be creative. We know that we have a great institution, but we're working on getting other people to know. And so hopefully I'll have a better, more detailed answer for you. We have a few things in the pipeline, but right now, nothing concrete. We're just kind of exploring best practices, looking at what other institutions have done, and then trying to figure out how that would fit Montevallo.
And Dr. Turner, if I could ask when those updates are available, perhaps that's information that could be shared, that could be disseminated. Thank you so much. Thank you. The next question I want to pose to Andrea, very explicitly, how does one who is white become an ally and start to grow and learn to speak in all white spaces about these issues?
Yeah, so I mean, I will readily admit that this is sort of a new thing for me. So I have an immense amount of privilege, not only because I'm white and female, but socioeconomic status, educational background, like all the things, right? And so I think that for me, it really changed for me. Actually, I think the first time I did the Selma Bridge crossing, when I moved to Alabama. I've only lived in Alabama for 4 years. I came from Texas. And so that got me really interested in ultimately joining the NAACP, and then getting on these calls and having these conversations. And then to try to take that back, it is interesting and different in terms of people challenging, sort of to your original question, right, around all lives matter, and how can you say I have white privilege, I grew up poor, so I think that there's a lot of education to be done. So I think for me personally, it was really educating myself on how can you respond to those things, right? What are the ways that you can sort of teach people that, right, that it's not that you grew up poor, it's that you don't ever go, your privilege is that you don't go into a store and worry that somebody's going to try to arrest you for shoplifting or be watching every move you make. And so putting it into terms like that I think people can understand. Now, I will say the other thing for me is I am very lucky as well to live in Montevallo and live in this community of very like-minded individuals. I do try to talk to some of the townsfolk about some of this from time to time. A lot of my town friends are 80 plus, and so that's a whole other conversation. But I do think it's just meeting people where they are, right? So and be willing to put that work in, be willing to I think Cedric said, right, you've got to have be willing to have uncomfortable conversations, and I think that's really the starting point. Is you educate yourself and then try to figure out where the people that you are trying to take your message to are, meet them there and try to build them up.
Thank you so much. And Kim, could you also address that?
Yeah, you know, it's been interesting with the current movement that we're seeing. I've had a few experiences. I'd like to give an example of a former student of mine. You know, I call her my soul student because we are aligned so much in our beliefs. But when I had this student, she actually had very bigoted ideals, and she had admitted to, you know, she would use the N-word and she looked down upon Black people. And so by her junior year, I started to see that transform, and I worked with her and mentored her, and now she's a warrior for the cause. But now she's such a warrior that she doesn't necessarily want to stand by us. It's like, I can tell you better now. You know, I can fight better than you. So now she's jumped in front of us, and so now I'm having to try to help her see the balance, right? And also help her to see that, you know, for instance, we had a rally here, and I said, okay, be careful when you go down there. You remember, you know, no one here is the enemy. We're just marching, you know, to bring awareness. And it's like, well, if the cops don't say anything, then, and we won't either. So, I mean, she was ready for that fight, right? And so I had to share with her, and they did, and unfortunately, if you saw what happened in Mobile, they did continue marching and ended up on the bridge and disrupted traffic, which is what I was saying don't do. And so I was watching that, and I saw that it was quite a few white people leading that. And so I said to her, you can do certain things and not suffer the consequences that the people, the students of color next to you will suffer. Don't create an environment so that you'll have an opportunity to protect the person of color, right? Don't start chaos or contribute to chaos so that you and your friends can get in front of them and say, I protect it. So I had to say, you know, I need you to check your privilege a little bit, because you can't be angrier than me at this moment, right? If I can contain myself, if I can regulate myself, then surely you can. And so what I am finding, I was on a panel the other night of women, and two of them were former civil rights leader. One were activists, one was white, one was Black. And as the moderator began to talk, she called on the white activist first. And she said, no, 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 no. You don't call on the white woman first. That's what the activist said. And so she then explained to her that when she was being trained, it was either you get it, you get in line, or you go home. And so she was at that moment was under the direction and guidance of those Black leaders. And so what is so very important for allies to recognize that don't step in front of us, right? Because you know better, because that in itself is oppressive. So you have to really, really, really check that privilege before you get involved. Also, it is very important to make sure that who you are becoming an ally with desires your presence, right? That don't go in as if I'm here to save you, but rather you are fully equipped to do what it is that you need to do. I'm here to learn from you, and I'm here to help. So it's the way that we approach it. Allies have been a vital part of our movements from day one. Allies have lost their lives, right? Very important. I tell students that all the time. We've never done it by ourselves, but it is important today. I see a different type of ally today. I see young people who are angry, right? But they don't understand that the consequences of those actions are not going to come back on you. They're going to say, this is what the Black people did on this day during this movement. And so you have to be responsible to us to make sure that you're not doing more damage than help. And so I think training is really needed in that area.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Kim. And also thank you, Andrea, for being honest about your experience as an ally. So thank you both for that. I also wanted to just leave this question here, not our final question, but just to leave it for all of us to address. When will things change? And we can start with Greg and move in class year. When will things change?
This Greg?
Yes, can you hear me now?
Oh, go ahead, Greg.
Oh, Greg Samuelson.
Oh, I'm so sorry. We have multiple Gregs. Greg Jones.
Can you hear me now?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay. I think things will change when people change. People have to, it has to be a hard change. As somebody just mentioned, Kimberly mentioned she was talking to one of her students, and initially she had some thoughts that were racist thoughts, and she talked to her as a student, and all of a sudden, over time things changed. I've had talked to numerous people since I graduated from Montevallo, white, Black, Hispanic, and I've shared my perspective on various matters, and I can't tell you how many people, coworkers that said, Greg, I didn't see it that way. A quick story, I was talking to a former coworker today who's a current FBI agent in Dallas, and he was working civil rights matters. And one of his squad mates is a white agent and nice guy, a great agent. Well, they received a Black man complain from a company about having somebody leave a noose in his car and on it at his job. And when the squad received that, the white agent received the complaint. And initially, the white agent didn't move on it, didn't see the urgency of it. And my friend, who's Black, talked to him and told him to explain the history of lynching, slavery, etc. And he became more involved. You would think, he would have done that right off the bat, but sometimes it's a teaching moment. Sometimes we have to share our differences and share what happened in the past, because if people haven't necessarily walked in our shoes, they may not see things the way we see them. So people have shared things with me, and I've had to get a different perspective. So again, we have to have conversations, discussions, group meetings, different things, just to make sure that people will do things the right way and foster an environment of respect so that everybody can achieve their potential and do great things in this world.
Thank you. And now that I recall that Greg Samuels is with us as well, Greg, could you, from your perspective as the incoming diversity officer for UM, speak to when things will change?
So I work in the College of Education and Human Development. And so I truly believe that things will have to change in policy. You know, skin color and race is so blatant, it could become more equitable in the way we do things. But based on me coming from the College of Education and what we do over there, I think you're going to have to focus on what we can do from where we are. I'll give you an example. So when I first got to Montevallo in 2014 as an assistant professor of secondary education, we sent interns all 3 semesters to different schools throughout the area. And so one of our schools, and the only school that we sent our students to, is completely white in terms of their faculty. So all the teachers were white except one. But today they're all white. And so that's from leadership down to their teachers. So what I did was I went to my colleague and I said, we're sending our students into a situation that's not very authentic. It's not like, well, it's authentic in that there are schools with all white faculty and teachers, but we want them to be exposed to diversity in their internship phase as well as when they get a job. So me being bothered by that, I went to my colleague and said, let's send them to 2 different schools. In the first 6 weeks, we can send them to this one school, which is completely white in their faculty. And their second 6 weeks, we can send them to another school, which is locally, right around the corner from us. So they could experience diversity in terms of the students that they teach and interact with, as well as their faculty. And so just small changes that we can make in the immediate time period, even though we're in a moment now, I think that's going to make a big impact, and that's going to bring forth change overall. Because now within the College of Education, at least in the phase in which I supervise, it doesn't exist in terms of a moment in which students will be exposed to all white faculty at a school. There's diversity at that phase. And I feel pretty proud that I kind of stepped up and made that change. But I think each and every one of us on this panel can make those changes. Other ways that we can make changes. I know we have programs and departments at our school that are completely white with no professors of color. Those are changes that we can make. But those are even changes that we can make on our hiring committee and within our programs as we exist in chairs and deans. So we got to start having those conversations if something bothers us and we know we can make change from where we are.
Thank you for that. And speaking to not all change is going to be at the macro level, that there may be things that you see in front of you presently that can rise to the level of speaking about it and doing something about it that becomes change. So thank you for those examples and for sharing your feedback. A couple of more questions. Again, if you have any additional questions, please do submit those. But the next question I would like to pose to Cedric, I don't believe explicitly talked about what is at play in the current movement. Could you talk to us and walk us through what are the calls for change and perhaps what you see are responses to those calls at the national, state, and the local level, and speaking to the local level being the Birmingham metro area?
So really specifically for the Birmingham metro area, I think this was on yesterday, Mayor Birmingham had a press conference saying that he would be reviewing, that the police department in Birmingham would be under a 30-day review to review all policies and make sure they're in accordance and guidelines with something a set of guidelines that the Obama administration published sometime in years earlier. I think what we're seeing, I think one of the things that we have to keep in mind about change is ongoing. It's not just a destination that we're trying to get to, it's something that is continually going. So in our quest for change, we cannot quit. If we reach a plateau or we reach a level of accomplishment, we have to move on to the next thing. Another thing we have to keep in mind, the system is always evolving. We're fighting a system, not an individual, not an organization, but a system of policies, a system of oppression. So as we are winning and getting things to change, that system is now adapting and changing to combat what we're putting back. So we have to continue to change. So on a national federal level, you have policies that are going into place or being proposed, such as the Breonna Taylor law, or in state policies where you have state governments that are now working to remove Confederate monuments throughout their state. Or in the case of Alabama, where we have a law against that on the state level. I think it was Madison County that asked for a waiver from the state as early as yesterday or a couple of days ago about receiving a waiver to remove Confederate monuments. So I think what we're seeing at a local, state, and national level is something that we need to go and speaking once again to taking advantage of opportunities. We can't let this opportunity pass by. We can't let it be bogged down by discussions and conversations with no actions attached to it. I know there's a lot of brouhaha about the U.S. Congress having kente cloths and taking a knee and, oh, what is this about? But what people didn't talk about is the measures that they are proposing as far as making it easier for civil lawsuits to come against police officers, eliminating certain police practices that don't benefit the community. I think those are the things that we need to focus on and not be distracted by minor petty things. I think what you're seeing at the local level is a more call for community involvement in how the police forces run. So I know the biggest thing that's getting a lot of attention now is defunding the police. And when people hear the defunding, they automatically freak out, thinking that you're saying pull all the money out the police department. That's not what the defund the police department movement is about. It's talking about taking some of the responsibilities and workload off these officers and putting it into organizations whose purpose is to serve that. So putting more money into mental health organizations, to putting more money into youth development programs or job training programs. So going to particularly attacking the root of the issue as opposed to having a reaction to the problem. So we're seeing more governments being called upon to be proactive when it comes to matters specifically regarding police and people of color. So those are some of the things that are happening now. But those things cannot happen if people don't hold their elected officials accountable, if they're not demanding new laws. So here in the state of Alabama, our legislative session is over, but there should be a committee or people working together to be pushing together new proposals, working with the governor's office for diversity to push new proposals and new legislation that can benefit the Black community or our community moving forward in the 2021 legislative cycle. So I think it's very important not to let this opportunity pass us by and keep applying pressure and keep moving towards change. So if some of these laws even get enacted and passed and put into place, that yes, we can celebrate. We deserve the right to celebrate, but now we still have to move forward. I think if you look at, and this is just my opinion, but if you look at the era between civil rights area and getting civil rights legislation in place and Dr. King dying, there was a sense of complacency that kind of shed over us because we're on TV, we're middle class now. We have this in place, we have this in place. So there wasn't that consistent movement on what is the next thing that we have to pursue. How do we continue to, because how do we maintain that change that we've gotten? So where areas, for example, during the Reconstruction era, we were in so many positions of power, and then the National Guard was pulled out basically, or the Army was pulled out by the current president at that time. And then it regressed. That change that we had accomplished or gained had regressed back to something else because it was not maintained. So not only about what are we doing moving forward, but how are we maintaining the changes that we've already gained?
Thank you so much for that, Cedric. And a very important point about the Reconstruction era, and that hearing from some individuals who are just now learning, being surprised that there was a period in the country's history where there were national Black elected leaders and wealth and growth, and then we found ourselves in a regression, a 150-year regression. So thank you for that. And speaking to that about next steps and what the next phase looks like, if I can go back to you, Andrea, what does the next 3 months look like for you? What you're hoping for, and maybe what you anticipate happening in the next 3 months?
Yeah, so I think, and to sort of echo many of my fellow panelists, so within the city of Montevallo, we have elections coming up. We have a mayoral race, we have city council races, and that's a good place for people to get started, I think, if you live in town. We have in November, I mean, that's a little further out than 3 months, but campaigns are already going, particularly if you live in Shelby County, part of Bibb, and part of Chilton County. We have a vacant seat in the Alabama House of Representatives. So our representative has resigned. And so there's already a race going there. That's going to be a special election. So I think sort of looking for those opportunities to cast your vote is one thing. I also think, I know we're gathering resources and things for everybody, but I just can't say enough about all the work that the national NAACP is doing. Their town halls, I think, have been very informative. So I would encourage anybody, I would encourage everybody to join. We have a local Shelby County branch. That's fantastic. And then it's the national branch that's doing the town halls and things like that. And I think that's a really great space to practice your listening skills. And so sort of learn how to check your privilege and just listen and hear what you need to do. But I think really getting involved in these groups that are going to be sent out is really a big way to do it. As I mentioned before, right, it's all about collective action. So whatever you can do in terms of donating money, donating your time, going out for a protest, right? Whatever it is that you can, whatever you can spare, right, to be an ally, I think is really good. So I think looking for groups, joining them, and then really paying attention to your local political scene and getting out. I mean, it's going to mean for a lot of us, we're going to be voting like 5 times in a row. Between primaries, runoffs, local, state, so it can be a little much, I think, sometimes, and people get voter fatigue. It's on Tuesdays, we got to take off work, but keep your eye on that. And absentee voting, I'm already hearing that the Southern Poverty Law Center is looking to try to get a suit going for absentee voting in this state, because it's actually very hard to vote absentee here, and that's a problem with the current climate around COVID. So those are, I hope that's not too many, but those are my suggestions.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that. And then I wanted to direct that same question to Sierra. What does the next 3 months look like for you from your perspective?
Lots of Zoom meetings. I have, like I said, we have been engaging in these conversations for a while now, but especially in the last couple of weeks. And so Greg and I, along with his wife and the Dean of the College of Education, will be meeting next week to start thinking about professional development for faculty and staff on campus. Because we've heard from students and we've heard about, different things that have happened in classroom settings that have made them uncomfortable, microaggressive behavior. And so we will be coming up with a series for faculty and staff that we hope will address some of those issues. Also working with the members from the Peace and Justice Studies, African American Studies, and the Latin American Studies programs to figure out how we can work better together in order to not only promote our programs, but also to facilitate an environment, I guess, if you will, on campus where students especially feel empowered to participate, where they feel as if they have a place, and to help them with that. And also looking at, some of the other issues that we have talked a little bit about here, hiring on campus, and thinking about ways that we can get creative as far as that's concerned. So we are very busy, and luckily this is the work that I personally enjoy doing. Sitting down, having the conversations, but also, like a lot of people have said here tonight, doing more than just having conversations, really thinking about how we can be very deliberate about the different, addressing the different issues and needs of our students, and then also the faculty and staff.
Thank you so much for that. And then my final question is to all of you. Is there any topic that we have not addressed that we should in tonight's discussion? Any question that you want to pose?
Something I think we need to look at and needs to be discussed further is the role of media in all this. Media can be an ally and as well as it can be a foe. I was at a conference a few years back and I heard Soledad O'Brien talking and speaking, and she was speaking about how they set up certain stories for a Black or Hispanic individual. They talked about all the turmoil and they had bad parents, and then it's like, but in spite of all that, they were able to do this and do this, that, and the third, as opposed to the lead-in being, where their parents were addicted to drugs, this, and the third. The lead-in should be, this remarkable individual was able to accomplish this and they're ahead of this class and graduated with this, that, and the third. But you would never know that their background was this. So how do we frame those conversations that put people of color at advantage and disadvantages? So the media plays a very crucial role in how all of this is spread. I shared an article, and I will share the clapback to an article. I think it was ABC News that did it, saying and just how they worded it. Amid protest, coronavirus numbers have skyrocketed. Well, reading that, you would think that, oh man, the numbers have skyrocketed because of the protests. No, those numbers skyrocketed because privileged individuals wanted to go out and socialize and be at the beach and everywhere else during Memorial Day weekend. So those are the numbers that it's reflecting, and not reflecting numbers from a protest. But if we don't hold the media accountable and push back against that, then that narrative is spun that look at these people of color being irresponsible. They're going around and spreading a virus that already negatively affects them. So I think the role of media in all this is a very important conversation to have.
Thank you so much, Sid. Others, any topic that we have not approached or any questions that you may have?
The one thing we haven't touched on is just the narrative that we have to, if things will change when we take control of that narrative. And the reason I think we've seen things perpetuate for so long is because we've not had control of that narrative. It was imposed upon communities of color. It was imposed upon European immigrants, right? And none of us have effectively challenged it or collectively challenged it. And so people ask, why are we in the 21st century and these issues are still going on? Because the narrative is absolutely the same. The narrative hasn't changed. Who we are, what we are, who is superior, who is inferior, is that even real? All of those things we have to dissect and discuss and stay open and honest until we do that. But we have to start with our young people. We talk about the civil rights movement, and I think the councilman mentioned that we were complacent, and we were just civil rights movement, then nothing. Right? And then we stayed complacent. But a lot of that had to do with the fact that no one would pass the mantle. I know I was jumping, like, hey, can I touch it? Can I sit at your feet? No one would pass it. They didn't want to let it go. And holding on to that, they didn't communicate the narrative, right? They didn't communicate who they saw themselves as while they were fighting, which is not who they are in the overall picture of, in America. And so we got the rights, we got the ability, but the mindset stayed the same for so many because no one shifted the narrative. So we're holding on to it. And so, and we're holding on to it because it ends with me. I saved the day, right? We got to let that go. We have to be empowering to those younger generations. And I'm talking about right now, I'm ushering kids to the front. You know, I'm only 48, but I'm ready to pass that mantle already. But the way that they will successfully do it is to help them reshape what that narrative is, and so they can take that narrative forward. We didn't do that with the civil rights movement. We hadn't done that successfully, period. So we have to address that narrative. And when we address it now, we don't only race us, right? When we look at trainings and issues of diversity, you only race the people of color, right? We got to address all races in the narrative, right? We don't race white people, but they are, right? It was a creation just as we are Black. And so as we shift that narrative, everybody has to be included in it, right? Don't other us. Stop othering us. And let's collectively shift that narrative, because we're all a part of it. We're all a part of it. That's necessary.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Kim.
And can I just kind of chime in and add on to what Kimberly was saying? Especially traditionally, when we talk about race in the United States, we tend to talk about it in this binary, Black versus white. And for so many reasons, that would be a whole nother conversation. That is so problematic, because in having those conversations, we are erasing the experiences of other groups that don't fit neatly into those categories. And so that is, something that from the work that I do with the Latin American Studies program and with the Spanish department is, I always try to point that out. Yes, I am a Black woman, but at the same time, there are so many other, people that are being left completely out of the conversation because they don't identify as Black, they don't identify as white. And so that's one of the things that I wanted to just contribute. But then also thinking about the question that you asked. Everything that we're doing, everything that we are talking about doing, it is all going to be in vain until we confront this country's racist past. And that is just the reality of the situation. And that requires, like Mr. Jones said, sitting down and having some very difficult, uncomfortable conversations. I know a lot of people that were always raised to say, you don't talk about certain things in mixed groups. And I think that for far too long, that has been sort of the mentality. And I think that has contributed to why we are at this moment right now, because we've always been so afraid of having these hard, difficult conversations in mixed groups. I can't talk about race when white people are in the room, or if I'm white, I can't talk about race when Black people are in the room. And we have to, again, confront that history, and we have got to, I always tell people, I'm okay with you being uncomfortable, because I think that it's from those spaces of, being uncomfortable that real change can happen.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that. Any final thoughts in our last minute or two? Any questions that we have not addressed? Any topics that we have not addressed?
Only because I think there are probably educators in the audience. I would say, I would challenge the educators to be really mindful of how they present data and rates, because one of the biggest, I think, contributors to how we are misperceived in our country are our rates, right? You can take rates and present a rate, and it would make us look like we are the majority of, right? We need to get back to using raw data. Now, if it's among us, or say I'm dealing with a group of social workers, who are working as a community activist, then yeah, they may need to know rates, right? It makes sense to them. But when I'm teaching in K through 12, or just a gen ed course, or students who are just learning for the first time, they're not actively working, those rates can be quite distorting, and it's necessary. I look at textbooks now, and if they don't list raw data, then I try to avoid them. Because I have seniors, when I first started at South Alabama, I had senior students, and I would say, tell me, who's the majority of people poor in America, or who are the majority of people in prison, and hands down, Black and white students alike were like, Black, 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 right? Because they hear those rates and it's misleading, it is intentional, and that's a part of that narrative that we have to dissect. So I beg my colleagues to please, use those raw numbers with those rates that you discuss.
Thank you for that. And that is absolutely something for us to keep in mind, those who are educators and those of us who are consumers of information as well. So thank you, Kim. Any final thoughts or feedback from Greg, or Andrea?
I just want to say thank you for this. This is amazing. And I think it was Cortez's idea, I think is what I remember hearing from the beginning. So I feel so happy that that you guys asked me to be a part of it. And yeah, it's a humbling experience to be able to get on these calls and have these conversations.
Really informative. Cortez, everybody, thanks for putting this together and letting me participate. I really enjoyed the panel and look forward to working with everybody in the future.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me. It's an honor to serve on a panel with everyone here. And even when we go back to our individual spaces, I think it's going to be important that we continue this conversation. It's, as you all know, it's a marathon, not a sprint. And so I hope that people continue to remain on social media and keep that going, especially some people who are privileged. Just keep that going, even beyond that. I know Dr. Eckelman, and I know what she does in her space. And for everyone else, I enjoyed hearing you all's story and your honesty and authentic stories. And remember, in my opinion, let's continue this fight, especially from our individual spaces in the short term until long-term change comes. So, and thank you all for sharing your stories. I really appreciate it.
And I want to thank all of you for taking time out of your day to provide this insight. I want to thank the family and extended family, those who are attendees, for being a part of this dialogue. This won't be the last time this is discussed. This is a long road and a lot of conversation and guidance and insight on the action that you can take. So please do continue to look out for that correspondence on additional opportunities and additional information, and feel free to give that feedback. If there are questions that you feel still aren't answered for you, please do provide that feedback to us. I would now like to send it back to Cortez. Thank you again, Cortez, for this idea and bringing it to fruition.
As Cortez is coming, I have to show off my mask. I told her I was going to show my University of Montebello mask. I only have about 30.
Okay. Well,
I have to have my
29.
mask so that I can represent. Montebello was some of the best years of my life, and so I have to represent.
You have
Cortez,
20. Yeah.
for doing this.
Okay. Well, I want the other one. So we're done.
Yeah, so I just want to say thank you to our attendees, to our panelists, to Carolyn and Tiffany, who are running behind scenes right now and doing everything, making sure everything runs smoothly. Just want to say thank you, thank you, thank you. And I'd also like to say that if you would like to see more panel discussions like this, please email us at alumni@montevallo.edu, and we will try to put on more panel. We will put on more panel discussions like this. And I just want to leave you with one thing. Try to educate yourself, everyone, not just our allies, but everyone. Educate yourself. Vote, volunteer, and be comfortable being uncomfortable, because that's what it's going to take to grow. No one grows from a comfortable place. I have a 1-year-old right now who is teething, and we know that she's in pain, but we also know that she needs to go through that pain in order to grow. So I would like to let everyone know, just be comfortable being uncomfortable. You'll grow from it. Thank you. I thoroughly enjoyed it. Our panelists did a great job. Attendees, you had great questions. So thank you. And that concludes the panel discussion.
Thanks. Y'all have a good evening.
You too.
Have a good
Look forward
evening.
to seeing you all again.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
All right. Y'all take care.
All right. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thanks,
Here, guys.
Terra.
Yeah.
unless you get ready to talk.